Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Kate, I make videos about books and bookish things, and today I'm going to be talking about a book that I reread for the first time in about 3 years and rediscovered that it is in fact even better than I remembered. I've been intending to make this video for quite a while simply because the book that I'm talking about was the one that I studied for my A-levels that genuinely, changed my life. It was the one book I read that did something to me psychologically, which sounds bad. I mean this in a good way. I mean that the writing and the characters and the general themes of the book stuck with me in such a way that it genuinely really affected me, compared to the other things I was studying that I could sit, read and go, yeah, these are good, and I understand why I'm studying them, but they aren't doing anything for me personally. This is the one that made me go, oh fuck, this is a really good book. I am talking about Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates, which is such an underappreciated book, as it turns out. I really expected that at least when I went to university I'd be able to meet some other people who had studied it. But no, in fact, this seems like a very rare text that I studied at my sixth form that very few others did, and so I need to espouse its general stunning qualities. So I guess a little bit of context. For my A-levels we did a variety of texts, and this was for part of the module that was called Texts in Shared Contexts, and specifically we were looking at 1950s post-war books that dealt with typically gender roles and family structures and just the ways that daily life was deeply affected by World War II without anyone really noticing. So we looked at Revolutionary Road in comparison to A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams, which I am certain many more people studied. But this, it seems, was the rogue choice to compare it with. Revolutionary Road, it turns out from my googling after I did this reread, was a debut novel by Richard Yates. This was his first book, and Richard Yates as an author is one who has fallen pretty much into obscurity. Certainly with his general literary peers, he is the one that has been forgotten while all the others are remembered. But posthumously there's been a lot more interest in his work for the ways it has generally impacted others, because it turns out he inspired a lot of other very famous writers, and so he deserves credit at the very least for his place within the building of the literary canon by inspiring those who were not him. So, what is Revolutionary Road about? Revolutionary Road follows a married couple, Frank and April Wheeler, as they decide that their life is not enough for them, that they want to aspire to bigger things. They are a perfect white picket fence couple in their late 20s, just reaching their 30s, with 2 beautiful children, but they have always felt that they have deserved more than they were given in life. They weren't meant to just have, April staying at home being a mother to their 2 children. Frank wasn't meant to be just some business middleman in a big factory company. They should have been doing more with their lives, and so this book starts at the point at which they hit their limits and decide, no, it is time to do greater things. And then it falls into tragedy, and it is the most heartbreaking, stunning thing imaginable. My most apt comparison for this within the general literary canon, I think, is that it is The Great Gatsby if it were not the American dream that they were aspiring to, but the European dream of being intellectual and beautiful and special. Special being the most important part of this, because oh my god, this is The Great Gatsby for the everyman. This is The Great Gatsby for the people who were never going to get to be the millionaires, the billionaires, the socialites, the celebrities, but just the people who could be renowned within their small circle. And it is all the more miserable for that. I think what first makes this book so truly fantastically written is the use of free indirect discourse, which, as you can tell, was the buzzword that was given to me when I studied this. Free indirect discourse being that you get a third-person narrative voice, but that it very much filters through into the inner monologue of specific characters, so that you are very subtly given just one person's view on things, and the person that we are shown the perspective of throughout is Frank Wheeler, the husband. The man who has been stuck in this perfect 9-to-5 office job where he has just flown under the radar for many years, quietly providing for his family, only to come home to April and complain about how, no one sees them, no one recognises what they are, what they could be, and that there is so much more that they should be doing, while she sits there listening, having spent the entire day taking care of the house and their children, and going, "You're quite right, Frank." And it is the most brilliant way to deconstruct this image of the Wheelers as special, unique people. I say this as though Frank and April are on an even footing with this. They are very much not, and that is something that we see through the fact that we only really hear Frank's thoughts about all of this. The The performativity of modern life is something that is so subtly interwoven throughout the book. Very specifically that everyone wants to believe that they are doing great, that they're happy with their lives, but that no one can really be happy with this. No one must actually be feeling that the white picket fence, 9-to-5, white-collar lifestyle is actually what they want. Frank and April certainly cannot believe that this is something that their friends, their peers, their neighbours on Revolutionary Road, where they live in the nicest house on the lane, that this couldn't really be the life that any of them were aspiring to, because it certainly wasn't what they wanted. The biggest and most important themes of this book, ultimately, I think, are authenticity versus conformity, and internal versus external, with this view to performativity, to performance. Because ultimately what Frank and April really want is to be special, to be seen as special, and they believe that that is their authentic selves, is something unique, something that stands out beyond the crowd, and that they are having to hide this in order to fit in with everyone else around them, but that they have something, they see something that the other people around them don't, which I'm sure you can tell by the way I'm talking about this, turns out to very much not be the case. They are exactly like everyone else around them, and it is them coming to terms with the fact that they are just like everybody else that is so heartbreaking and leads to the ultimate tragedies that take place in this book. In particular, it is the rebelliousness of the gender roles exhibited in this, and the ways that Frank and April really are what the other one aspires to be. Frank believes that what he really wants is to go out and be unique, to do something that makes him special and noticeable and worthy of attention. His whole life he has been seeking this validation that he's not like other blue-collar workers, that he is something somehow unique and different from everyone else. And this really, really stems from his very, very stagnated view of his masculinity. One of the first images that we are greeted with at the start of the book is him trying to lay this path of patio stones up to the house, and him sweating and heaving and really struggling with it, but believing that he needs to get this done because he is haunted with this image of his dad's strong, capable, blue-collar hands that he has always wanted to have. These were hands of a man is something that he repeats in one of these very early chapters, and so he needs to be able to do this, to lay this path, to be the white-collar worker that his family needs him to be. But he doesn't actually want to be special, is what he ends up realising. As much as he believes himself to be intellectually superior, to have these unique thoughts that make him special and worthy of specifically April's attention, the reality is that as the book progresses and he starts to be put up for a promotion at his job, that actually he really likes just being special in this very humdrum way. He likes just being, you know, man of the hour at the company. He likes being able to settle down and read the newspaper to his children and otherwise leave them to April and go to bed, happy that he's done a good enough job. But the problem is that April doesn't want that. And April has played the submissive, perfect housewife for such a long time, with this belief that she and Frank are going to go out and change things at some point. That the only reason they settled into this life is because April got pregnant 5 years earlier than they had planned. When they were in their early 20s, they'd had all these dreams about moving to Paris and being the hot young couple who were intellectuals, who had cool, clever friends who did something with their lives. And the plan was eventually to settle down and get married, but it wasn't going to be then. But April got knocked up, and so they got married, and they had a second one to prove that the first one wasn't a mistake, which is a line that Frank says within the book. The whole point being that they have created this perfect 9-to-5 working family with 2 kids and a white picket fence exclusively to prove that they have not made a mistake, that this is exactly what they'd planned to do from the very beginning. But the fact remains that this isn't what April wanted, and even though Frank starts to settle into this life actually being the one that he wants, it isn't what April wants. And so when she eventually suggests that, hey, they could just move to Paris with the kids, why not chuck in the job, save the money from the selling of the house and go to France and do this, Frank starts to get cold feet and April starts to push hard, and this is when the gender roles really, really start to unravel them. Because Frank needs to be masculine, he needs to be in control, he needs to be the one who knows what he's doing, and he needs April to follow him. But April has never been a follower. She has been a very, very good suggester. She's been very, very good at nudging Frank in the directions she wants him to go in, until it hits a point where he decides that no, his masculinity is affirmed by his job, and so he has an affair. At work, he takes a mistress, and that reaffirms to him that yes, he is the alpha male top dog that he has always wanted to be, and April just sort of fades into the background. This whole way through, because we are privileging Frank's perspective, because it's his thoughts that we get, we see how changeable April is in his mind. At the very, very beginning, the opening chapter, he goes to watch an Amdram production of a play that she is the lead role in, and he plans how this evening is going to go before he even gets there. He thinks in the car on the way there about how proud a husband he's going to be, about how he's going to have to reassure her that yes, she did an excellent job, dear, and complimenting her in front of all of their little neighbourhood friends, and it's going to be perfect. But the fact remains that when she comes off stage and it turns out she actually didn't do a fantastic job, she doesn't want him to comfort her. She just wants to be left alone, and Frank can't cope with a wife who doesn't want his reassurance, and so he lashes out. He ends up punching their car. Frank wants April to be this very, very specific thing to him, and so we see her go from the perfect, witty, beautiful girl that he danced with in his 20s that he decided he was going to marry one day, to this old, wizened, too tall, too ugly, too intense woman that he is now married to when she isn't doing what he wants her to do. It is a fascinating way to see how their gender roles break down in the face of their completely opposed wants and needs. And the fact remains that we only hear Frank in all of this. We know that he has decided he doesn't want to go to Paris, and he can't do anything about the fact that she has decided they want to go there. Until a big mistake happens, and this is where I have to spoiler warn in case you do want to read this, because it is obviously a massive plot point, so I will give you a little time code. Skip to there if you don't want to hear this massive spoilery point. Frank doesn't know how they're going to get out of moving to Paris until April gets pregnant by accident for the second time. And they have to come to terms with the fact that they probably can't move to Paris if they're having to support 3 children on just the money left over from selling the house, if Frank is truly going to move to Paris and be the intellectual that he wants to be, not working, just thinking, while April works instead. And it's the perfect out for him, because now he can relegate her to mother, housewife, for a final time and say, no, we're staying here. The chapters that follow the decision that he makes that yes, they want this baby because it makes them stay put, and April saying it would be so easy for me to just quickly do a home abortion, and the way that when he finally wins out and breaks April down and she goes, fine, you're getting what you want, we're keeping the baby, he nearly throws up with the realisation that he's going to become a father for the 3rd time and that he never even wanted the first one. The breakdown of these perfect family structure, the gender roles that they've assigned themselves, this perfect life that isn't perfect for either of them anymore, until it works for one of them but not the other, is just devastating and brilliant. This constructed image of Frank as someone who is an intellectual is so interesting to read as well, because as I say with the free and direct discourse, we get his inner monologues, we understand exactly how he thinks, and so the fact that he has convinced himself that he is an intellectual, that he is superior to everyone else, and that going to Paris would be to finally fulfill this part of him that's been, you know, stumped down for so long by his job and by his family and all these things he never wanted, is just laughable. He's an idiot. He's so stupid. He's naive. He has no clue what he's doing about anything. And all of the ways in which he convinces himself that he is valuable is just an attempt to fulfill this masculine stereotype set up for him by his father. And it's just fantastic. More than anything, we see it with, as I described with the wood players incident, with April failing in her performance and then not wanting reassurance, as Frank was certain she would. Throughout the novel, we get these constant views as to how Frank constructs conversations before they even happen. In the present moment, in many instances, for example, when he's in meetings about his promotion, when he's with his mistress and thinking about how he's going to tell April eventually, we see him, even as he's living the moment, start to unpick the events as they happen and decide how he wants to present them, more specifically to April than anyone else. The ways that he decides he's going to undermine this little bit so that she doesn't take it seriously, so that he can then put it to her that maybe they should take it seriously, that he can be the one who proposes all these big bold ideas, and that maybe, just maybe, he can change her mind with his clever words. One of the lines that has stuck with me ever since I read it for the first time is during a truly vicious argument between April and Frank. She laughs in his face and goes, "Oh Frank, if black could be made into white by talking, you'd be the man for the job." She doesn't believe a word of any of this, and it is absolutely fascinating to never see April's perspective, to only see Frank so certain he can can manipulate her with his words, and to have April come up short every single time, to disappoint him by being smarter, more canny, by having the more adventurous dreams than him. He wants her to be satisfied with a little life. He wants her to want this small existence they've built together because it satisfies him and his view of his masculinity. But the fact remains that April was never going to be satisfied by that. And so I come to the most devastating part of this. Frank and April were never going to work out, and that much is pretty clear from the beginning of the book, but the fact remains that they were never going to work out because they both sought in each other the thing that they never got as children. And so I'm going to talk a bit about plot-devicey children because I think it is just brilliantly done in this book. Frank, throughout, we see that it is his masculinity that fails him, that he wants to feel accomplished, and the only way he knows how to do that is by being a man. And so he picks April because she sees him as everything he wants to be. The most important thing to him is that when they first slept together as young adults was that she told him he was the most interesting man she had ever met. And he clings to this. Throughout the book, it comes up time and time again, is that he was the most interesting man she had ever met, and that really, really matters to him. And then, in the one chapter we get from April's perspective, in which she plans to do the most ambitious, bold, dangerous thing possible in order for her to get her way, she reflects on the fact that she only ever said that so that he'd love her, because all she has ever sought is to be loved. And it absolutely breaks my heart. All April ever wanted was to be loved by someone. She was abandoned by both of her parents as a child and raised by an aunt who didn't really care for her. And so, yes, she'd say anything that Frank wanted so that he loved her. But the fact remains that he never will, because she is not who he wants her to be. And so she says that he's intellectually superior, that he gets things in a way that other people don't, so that he'll do that for her. And there is this just absolutely brilliant paragraph within her only chapter in which she reflects on the fact that, yes, this probably would have been a fine thing to do for a couple of years as young adults, you know, to string him along by saying exactly what he wanted to hear so that she got the love that she needed, but that it wasn't anything to build a life around. That it wasn't worth starting a family, getting married, settling down, and then planning to move to Paris with the whole lot of them, because it could never have been what they needed, the two of them. And the fact remains that Frank genuinely does not care whether April loves him or not, so long as she thinks he is interesting. He reflects on the fact that he genuinely couldn't care less if she stops loving him after she finds out about the affair, because he always intends to tell her at some point, or at least he tells himself that, just so long as she still thinks that he's interesting. His masculinity is affirmed by sleeping around, and his interestingness is affirmed by his wife. And that's all that really matters. And so we get to children, to childhood, to where these issues start for each of them. April having been abandoned by her parents, just seeking any kind of love and validation, and Frank determined that he needs to be special, that he needs to be better than his father, to live up to this standard of masculinity, but doing so with his brains rather than with his brawn, because he knows he can't be the big, muscular, masculine man that his father was. And the ways that they treat their own children. Jennifer and Michael are April and Frank's children, Jennifer being the daughter that they had by accident, and Michael being the son they had a few years later to prove that Jennifer wasn't an accident. We only ever see them in very brief snippets throughout the book, and normally it is them getting in the way, annoying Frank in particular, by standing in the way of him trying to lay this big stone path, or not paying attention properly when he reads them the newspaper, or when they plan to move to Paris, not being excited about mummy and daddy getting new jobs, and instead being scared about what's going to happen to their friends at home and can they take their toys with them, and just generally never fulfilling them. And so, in the same way, they recreate these power struggles to be interesting and to be loved in their own children through these problems. That is why I think Revolutionary Road is such an interesting book, because it was written in the 1950s, post-World War I, in this time where psychological issues were still very much being swept under the rug, and yet there is this really, really specific, nuanced look at the ways that childhood, not even trauma, but neuroses come through in adult life, and specifically with this wartime masculinity, you know, hold your chin up, be a good person, and just enjoy your quiet, humdrum, white picket fence existence. The ways that they screw up these grown-ups and make their kids even worse in the end. It's just so absolutely brilliantly, chaotically, miserably done. Not least because when April goes and makes her big decision at the very end, which I'm determined I will not be spoiling for you because it is just too good. In the lead up to it, she sends the kids away. She leaves them with one of their neighbourhood friends and says, hey, can they stay with your kids just for a couple of days? We've got some business to sort out, you know, we can no longer move to Paris and all the rest of it, which is a shame, but, you know, we're just having to sort out the house, so can you take them? So that April can be alone in the house while she makes this big decision. Frank is at work, the children are away, and for the first time in a very long time, it is just her and her mind and her own determination that you have to do the right thing just once, but if you can do it, you're sorted. And she does. And so she proves herself to be more assertive and capable and canny than Frank could ever be. Which, considering the whole way through the book we've seen his attempts to justify his own intelligence, and then in one chapter we see how she is 10 times the man that he could ever be. It's brilliant. It's just so good. Going back briefly to these ideas of authenticity versus conformity, one of the most interesting sort of episodes or subplots within the book, as far as I see it, is John Givings. Basically, Frank and April are neighbours with Mrs. Givings, who sold them the house, and she has a mad son. She has a son who had a schizophrenic breakdown, threw a table at her, and so has been locked up in a local asylum, but the time comes where he's allowed to start being let out and seeing people again, and she decides that she wants him to see the Wheelers, because they are a perfect couple in the best house that she picked out for them on the best lane in the area she manages. And so John Givings goes to meet Frank and April, and they talk to him about their plans to move to Paris, and he goes, yeah, I get it. The world's fucked, isn't it? And you want to be and do something special, because you're special kind of people. I like that. You see what's going on. And Frank and April are unnerved by the fact that they're being agreed with by a supposed madman, but they love it. Until they can no longer move to Paris. John Givings is the only authentic, sane person in this book, and it is because he is designated as mad, and so no one will listen to a word he says, apart from April. Frank takes a strong disliking to John after he points out that they could very reasonably still move to Paris despite their predicament, but it's clear that one of them doesn't really want to, and he identifies that it's Frank, and Frank is so emasculated by this that he cannot cope, and he screams at John and tells Mrs. Givings that they cannot see him again, that he's just too mad, and they shouldn't be letting him out anymore, and... ah, my god, this only view of authentic experience, that John truly sees everyone for what they are, sees the world for what it is, and how disappointing and, you know, thinly veiled everyone's neuroses are, including his own. But the only person who really agrees with him is April, and she, well, the book ends as it does, and so it is very clear that authenticity is not really allowed to exist in this environment. It's so good. It's so good. It's so fucked. Because that's what this book is about the irreconcilable differences between Frank and April, between choosing to be happy with this very, very small, fairly miserable existence, or breaking out and doing something extraordinary and becoming the special person that you truly think you are. And the fact remains that Frank thinks he wants to be special, but is actually fine being comfy at home, and April is forced into this sterile home environment to perform being a housewife, to perform being a mother, but she is desperate to break out, and because Frank won't let her, only tragedy can occur, and it is just brilliant. Especially because we only ever see her through Frank's eyes until this one chapter in which we see that she is infinitely better than he could ever have been. It's just phenomenal. The other thing I want to just give this book kudos for as well is the writing. There's so many good books, there's so many well-written books, and I don't know whether this is the effect of me having studied it for sixth form or not, but genuinely I think Revolutionary Road is one of those few books where every single sentence is perfectly constructed. Every single sentence tells you something new, reveals something spectacular, or contains the most detailed but graphic metaphors. One of the things I really truly love about it is the way that it takes these very little mundane experiences and brings them to light in ways that you wouldn't expect to really be noted when it's written about. For example, in the second chapter it talks about Frank on his way to find April after the performance in which she absolutely bombed, and it talks about the way that he's cracking his knuckles and that his nails are all bitten from during the performance, and that his back is sweating and he's having to try and hoik up his underwear without making it look like he's lifting up his underwear as he walks through this auditorium, and it's just brilliant. These little mundane grossnesses that give such liveliness and reality to this book about whether or not you want to commit to reality. It's it's just spectacular. It's just amazing. And I have no idea how Richard Yates is not a better known writer for this incredible ability he has to pick up on the little things and make them into the bigger ones. This book could only ever have been a tragedy. There is no happy ending that exists for Frank, for April, for their family, or for the community they are a part of, and as much as I dislike tragedies for how much they absolutely wrench at my heart, this is a perfect one, I feel, and I really wish more people read it, very simply, because I think it is just so special. Listen, the only way Frank and April were ever going to get their happy ending is if they learn to just be cringe and free, to not try and spend their entire lives being perfect white picket fence families, but doing it ironically, but to just go, listen, let's either commit to doing this properly or let's go and do something else. But they were never going to be able to do that because Frank wants to be special and April wants to be loved, and neither can give the other what they want. And I think that's just about everything I have to say on this book without spoiling massive parts of the story, which I just sincerely hope someone goes and reads after this and gets to experience for themselves, because the plot twists that come between parts 1, 2 and 3 are just brilliant, especially the concluding chapters after April's big decision and the aftermath of that. It's just immaculate. So, Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates. This is the one book that my A-levels made me encounter that was just beyond anything they could teach in a school. Although I have to say for a moment, this cover drives me up the fucking wall. What this cover shows you is nothing of the plot. Nothing about this tells you about the contents, and you know that guy on TikTok who does redesigns of classic book covers based on the actual content of the book and trying to show you what it's going to be like? I would love to see him tackle this one, because the images you could create for Revolutionary Road, I'm immediately just thinking of the sedum plants that die in the basement of Frank and April's house as a symbol of their inability to commit to domesticity, or the children's playhouse that Jennifer desperately wants to take to Paris, but that April goes, no dear, that's too big for us to take with us, leave it behind. Anything like that would be immaculate, but anyway, yes, Revolutionary Road is deeply underrated, and I wish more people had been forced to encounter it in sixth form, because this broke my brain in a really good way, and yeah, it only got better for rereading it. Side note as well, it was really interesting to reread with all my little annotations throughout, because I had studied this for school, and so it's got my little class notes about the characters and the themes, specifically gender roles. That was what was really emphasised to us in school, and now I see it's less the gender roles and more the childhood neuroses that lead to everything. But yes, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it inspires at least someone who's read this that hasn't to pick it up, or anyone who has read it and has been waiting for a video like this to talk to me about it, because oh my god, is this book perfect. Please do give this video a like if you did indeed like it. Comment down below, 1 if I've convinced you, or 2 if you've already read this, because talk to me about this book, please. And yeah, if you're new here, feel free to subscribe, because I do love making videos about books that only I seem to obsess over. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.